Greetings, friends, and welcome to the Trustees Conservation in Action webinar series for the spring of 2022. I may be getting a little ahead of myself with spring with a storm on the way. My name is Jessica May, and I'm the Managing Director of Art and Exhibitions here at the Trustees and the Artistic Director for the De Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum, also here at the Trustees. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you're as excited as I am to peer into the future of our contemporary arts programs. Each one of our more than 120 properties has its own unique history and treasures to offer. And our team of stewards, curators, ecologists, and many others all play a role in bringing these environments to our audiences in the most meaningful possible way. Today, you'll hear about an exciting year and a little bit more, I admit, of contemporary art coming up at the Trustees. These efforts would not be possible without the support of our donors and friends. We cannot thank you enough. And I do say this all the time. You offer to us both the sustenance to keep the lights on, as well as the reinforcement and meaning that we need in order to want to keep the lights on. So I truly thank you all for your support of our organization and programs. As the world has gone virtual these past 2 years, we've created online programming like this webinar series. Our team has done an incredible job of keeping our properties open and operating safely. We saw over 2 million visitors to our properties last year, and many people continue to renew their appreciation of nature and getting outside, and do so in conversation with us. I hope these webinars will inspire you to get out and explore a Trustees property and help you to learn about many of our new projects and initiatives. We believe this work will help us get the next generation outside, get the love of arts, and build a Trustees of the future. Thank you again for supporting our mission to protect and share the places that we love. I'm going to invite you all to type in questions at any point that you have them. And then at the end of my presentation, and I promise not to go on too endlessly long, my colleague Javon will help sort them, and we can have a bit of a dialogue at that time. But I'm going to get started with looking at a kind of vision for contemporary art at the Trustees, and just thinking, let's see, I'm not quite moving forward yet. I promise we practice this. And thinking a little bit about what we're up to this coming year and how it fits into what we're up to overall. At the Trustees, we believe that art possesses a unique power to sharpen the senses and spark new understandings of the natural world. This image of Yepa Hines' installation at World's End a couple of years ago has been so pivotal for me in thinking about the ways in which art can actually deepen our experience of place. And as a first-year employee of the Trustees and someone entrusted with the responsibility for thinking about what art at the Trustees can be, should be, and needs to be, what I have been really excited about is to kind of imagine a future for art programs that really focus on providing access to visitors to new insights about the world that we share. So what does that mean? That means that over the coming years, we'll deliver a robust program of art and exhibitions that welcome and inspire deep conversation about the capacity of our shared creative actions to support, sustain, and renew our attention to places in our planet. And we're looking at here an image of the crowd that's gathered at Castle Hill to enjoy the amazing Doug Aiken New Horizons project a couple of years ago as well. And to me, what I love about this particular image is something that I think is so memorable about the Art in the Landscape project and Doug Aiken's project in general, which is that it did so much to unify the audience's sense of place, to deepen their sense of experience in place, and to bring awareness of a sense of occasion. Art for audiences of so many of our projects makes the occasion and the moment and the place clear and brings it into focus in a way that very few other forms of experience can. So I've been taking this insight and this sort of thinking about the value of experience of art and building this into a vision for Art at the Trustees. And for me, Art at the Trustees really will combine on the one hand, our museums at the Trustees, our Precious de Cordova, our storied and amazing Fruitlands Museum. It will include insights into exhibitions at the Trustees, and I'll show you a little bit of what I mean by that. But we're looking at projects that, that offer opportunities to see sites that we're very familiar with in a new way, such as George Rickey at Namkhek this coming year, and looking at art in the landscape as our signature commissioning program, bringing new artists and new artworks onto our sites. And we're thinking about how to take the value of focused attention, the value of access, the value of learning to all of our different sites. Showing here kind of wonderful range of different sites and opportunities, including in the lower right-hand side, Maria Maltini and Alison Halter making their incredible work of art, Sacred Sheets, which is currently on view at Fruitlands Museum, and takes as its inspiration the Shaker collection, as well as in the upper left, a view onto Jeffrey Gibson's amazing Infinite Indigenous Queer Love, currently on view at the de Cordova, and between them, sites of different art at the landscape projects. And I hope that you will, as I have, come to see that what we're thinking about with regards to art at the Trustees is an open-ended program that borrows from the future, borrows from the sites that we have, borrows from the historical cultural collections under our care, and begins to start telling a story and connecting with visitors across the state in thinking about what it means to share this earth, to live on this earth, and to be in place. One of the things that I was thinking about as I was preparing for this panel, and as I have been sort of thinking about the opportunities that are before us at the Trustees for the Art at the Trustees programs across the state in the coming years, is an experience that I had in 2018 when I visited the Arctic Council annual meeting in Reykjavik for the first time. And I, as a curator, was very much a fish out of water at that particular session, because for the most part, the Arctic Council is a gathering of government employees, NGOs, business people who do work in the Arctic, climate scientists and journalists. And they didn't quite know what to do with a curator and artist who showed up just to listen and learn. But at one point, an airline executive who served Greenland Air said to me, you know, I'm actually really glad you're here because we've been waiting for a long time to find new ways to tell the story of what's happening in the Arctic. And I always think about that as a really wonderful mission, is to think about how it is that artists and the people that support artists can help expand the ways in which we tell stories. And so that to me winds up being what I think of as the kind of through line for all of our work across our museums, our exhibition programs, and our Art at the Landscape program. And so I'm going to give you a first great example, which is I hope many of you have had an opportunity to see these works of art yourselves. These are the three extraordinary new sculptures that are part of, in fact, the core, the heart of Jeffrey Gibson's exhibition, Infinite Indigenous Queer Love, that's currently on view here through the beginning of March here at the de Cordova. I'm in my office here, so that's why I say that. As many of you will know, Jeffrey Gibson is one of the most acclaimed artists working in the United States today. He is Mississippi Choctaw Cherokee, and he has really, I think, changed our understanding of what is possible in contemporary art, and continues to as he moves from large outdoor sculptures, as you'll see if you drive onto our campus, to paintings. Now in this project he's showing works on paper, video work, and these extraordinary monolithic sculptures that are made up of some nearly 60,000 strands of fringe, as one would see at a powwow or other ceremonial experience. This show moves us from indoors to outdoors, helping to sharpen our understanding of Indigenous history in America, Indigenous aesthetics in America, and what it means to make something large and build it into the landscape. Jeff's large-scale monument on our campus, in fact, is a reference to the history of Mississippian monuments that were on in Midwestern landscapes long before so many of us in our modern world were. Just want to remind you all that one of the things that's coming up that's so exciting is that Jeff will be in conversation with Professor Philip Deloria of Harvard's Department of History in just less than a month now. That conversation will be virtual, which means there is absolutely no barrier to participation. And we're anticipating this being one of the most extraordinary events of our springtime. So I hope that you will be able to join us for that event. Shortly after that exhibition, Jeff will exit stage right and the works will go on to another venue, and we will welcome the New England Triennial, which used to be the New England Biennial. Previous to that, starting in 1989 at the DeCordova, it was the New England Annual, and it was an opportunity for curators here at the DeCordova to look across the 6 states of New England and think deeply, not about the best artists, but about a kind of snapshot of contemporary art now. We've had the most wonderful experience working on this project, as we have on other projects like this in the past, because it's given us real insight into the community of art makers and into what art means to them and to their own communities. We are so excited on April 8th to debut this as a triennial exhibition that is in fact a partnership of the museums of the trustees, the DeCordova and Fruitlands Museum. Between the 2 sites, we will include 25 artists, for many of whom this is the first major exhibition they will have participated in. So we see this as an opportunity to really show off some extraordinary talents here in New England. This show is the product of 4 curators working over 2 years, largely on Zoom. They did literally dozens, if not hundreds, of studio visits, often on multiple occasions, with artists who had to radically, in some cases, retrofit their artistic practice to working indoors, working in a studio, not traveling, and working under conditions that I think we can all agree might be rather stressful. So we are incredibly proud to be able to present this show, and more than ever, it really does feel like a snapshot and an opportunity. One of the things that the curators have done that I think is so interesting and inspiring is they thought about this show in terms of a series of thematics that have come out. These themes are subtle. They didn't ask every artist to, for instance, adhere to one of the themes that I'm about to show you, but instead they observed in their visits with artists and in the works that they were seeing a certain set of tendencies, and tendencies that helped them understand the ways in which artists were connecting the pandemic and the upheaval of American life in the past couple of years to the art that they're making. I absolutely love this painting by David Antonio Cruz, which is part of a series of works he did asking people to bring their chosen family to the studio for a portrait. Cruz teaches at Tufts, and one of the things that I think is just so wonderful about this is not only is these 2 figures' relationship to one another interesting and surprising, but their relationship to the space that they're in, it's almost as though they're becoming part of the studio space. Another thematic that runs through the show is around decay and ruin, not at all surprising given the circumstances of the past couple of years, and not at all surprising given the ways in which a conversation around the climate and the natural world has changed in the past few years. Jody Mack begins her work by using her garden in Vermont, where she brings together bundles of natural materials, flowers, weeds, seeds, and freezes them, and then makes recordings of the dissolution of these balls of sort of wondrous nature. A third series that promises to be quite extraordinary part of this exhibition is the concept of seeking one's place in the world, which has a very virtual, if not immersive, aspect in this particular work by Alison Maria Rodriguez. This, for Rodriguez, as well as so many other artists in the show, is a real breakaway moment, and we are very excited to be working with artists, often, as I say, on the very first major museum exhibition. Another section of the show that I have found meaningful and has given me new insights into my own experience and my family's experience, and experience actually that I take every time I listen to data about the pandemic, is the concept of visualization of data, visualization of emotion, visualization of the body. This particular work by Canadian artist who lives and works in Portland, Maine, Sasha Bronic, is one of a series of oil paintings. It's remarkable to me that this is actually an oil painting that she makes, in which these sort of flattened, two-dimensional, almost algorithmic style figures express a surprising level of emotional resonance and depth. They are the very definition, to my eye, of stressed out. And yet, each of these works has an unexpected warmth that I find absolutely enchanting. The final section of the show, and perhaps the most, I believe one reviewer called it spectral, is the artist as medium. These alchemical transmutations are difficult to pin down, yet in the classic way, we sort of know it when we see it. Harry Gould Harvey, who is an artist who lives and works in Fall River and is the founder of a contemporary art space there, has made quite a splash in the past few years for making these works that one reviewer called hexed. I think of them as spectral, but he's using historic materials such as frames and other sites in making these sort of line drawing style paintings that seem to have a connection to the other world. And so here, Harvey presents himself somewhat as the medium for that other world. Well, we are incredibly excited to be preparing the Triennial. That is certainly not the only project we're preparing. And at the Decorative this summer, we are over the moon to be able to present Melvin Edwards' Brighter Days, one of the first exhibitions of a solo exhibitions that we've had in some time in the Sculpture Park here. This is a project that originated from the public art program in New York City. It will come to us as the second venue, and we could not be more delighted to be able to show this work. You're looking here at the most recent work in the show. It was made in 2020. And I think of this particular work of art as a true American treasure. This is Song of the Broken Chains. The exhibition itself opens at the beginning of June. And I'll tell you just a little bit about Melvin Edwards, who I think of as a true national treasure. He is a Texan by birth, has worked for quite a long time in the Northeast, primarily in New York and the Hudson River Valley. He really is a key figure in modern abstract sculpture. And one of the things that continues to come back to me as I look at his work is how clearly Edwards was in conversation with artists such as David Smith. And yet he's somebody who, while he has been a kind of key figure across the board for American modernism and American abstract sculpture, he's somebody who's really keenly attuned to the symbology, symbols, and history of Black America in particular. This is the first focused thematic survey of Edwards' outdoor sculpture and public art, although he has been celebrated so often in recent years in indoor exhibitions. And we will be the very proud hosts of 6 large-scale sculptures that survey 40 years of his practice. So we are over the moon about this. And I anticipate that I may get asked a question about my favorite work of art. And I have to say I find this beautiful rocker one of the most moving objects that I know of in the canon of contemporary American art. I am about 5'6", and when I stand next to this work, the rocker comes right up out to my head. It does actually rock, although for our audiences, it will not rock. Unfortunately, one of the things about putting art in the public realm is engagement is limited for large subjects such as this. But what is so amazing to me about this particular work of art, and it is one of the earliest works in the show dating from around 1970, is that it evokes for me a mother's rocker, a swing set, the American flag, and the history of slavery and the more sort of catastrophic uses of chains in American life. And so it embodies what I think is so important to Edwards' practice overall, which is these symbols of comfort, pleasure, even identity, while at the same time also evoking aspects of these materials that are nothing if not catastrophic and ominous. Here are a couple of other works in the show that were included. Here you see in the background Federal Court Plaza. I think it's called Federal Court Plaza in New York City. And this kind of amazing quotation that Mel said in thinking about this particular project and this particular sculpture in general. Well, Melvin talks about chains as a kind of key motif for him as an artist. He wants us to remember that chains both relate to the history of slavery, but it is not that they only relate to the history of slavery. And I think he says it better really than anyone else could. But for me, this quotation encapsulates something larger than just this work of art or even really this show. It really encapsulates the way that art, and especially sculpture, can push our brains in two or more directions at once. You can see on the one hand horror, on the other hand possibility. You can see on the one hand the past, and on the other hand the future. You can see on the one hand nature, and on the other hand culture. And it's really this duality that art gives us insight into that for me makes art stick with us. And I think it can help us find insight and resonance in the stories of the natural world. I'm going to keep going with showing you other exhibitions that we're looking at for this year and even beyond. This particular image is not a trustee's property. Instead, it is probably the only time recently that I've shown a property that's not even in New York. This is George Rickey's studio in East Chatham, New York. And George Rickey returns to Namkeg this spring with an exhibition called View Escapes that will be both indoors and outdoors with a number of major works by Rickey at Namkeg. As you may know, this Rickey had shows in 1994 and 1997 at Namkeg and adored, really saw his work as being at its epitome in Fletcher Steele's garden design and on that site. So I think this incredibly handsome and lovely image of Rickey on the right and the two open trapezoids, one of the real stars of the show as installed last summer for a very short period of time at Namkeg, gives you a sense of the kind of freewheeling and pleasurable nature of this show. Indeed, View Escapes, I think, helps us understand both that this show is designed to be part of the view itself, but also designed to remind us pleasure of escape and sometimes the mere pleasure of being able to look at a kind of integrated landscape and artwork. One of the things that I wanted to do with this talk was just give you a little bit of behind the scenes insight. So that's why you're looking at these two rather unlovely photographs now. On my left, I'm showing you one of the bases that we put in actually last fall so that we could have the base in and plant the bulbs for this year's garden show. And indeed, I highly encourage a visit out to Namkeg during this year's tulip and bulb show because it will give you an opportunity to see these sculptures embedded intentionally in the garden displays. And in the right, you see this sort of wonderful back of house view that I think is one of the great gifts of being a curator. My colleague, Mark Wilson, snapped this in East Chatham at the George Rickey property, so that you could get a sense of the ways in which the sculptures are there and kind of ready to get ready to go out into the world. A couple of other major projects will be in this summer's viewscape, and it really gives you a sense not only of the dynamism and pleasure of Rickey's work, but also the ways in which the works are brightly colorful and interact with the outdoors, not only formally, but also through their color. Another major project that we've been working on for this year, which will open at the very beginning of May, is Rose B. Simpson's Counterculture. Rose is an artist who lived for a short time in New England as a student at RISD, but is from and is and whose family goes back not only generations, but millennia in what is now known as New Mexico. She is of the Santa Clara Pueblo. She lives on the reservation in Santa Clara, New Mexico, and is a 7th generation artist who is ceramicist, and has come to us with a proposal for a project that we are so enthusiastic about. This project, Counterculture, involves 12 9-foot tall sculptures of the figures that you see, that I see on my right. And each of these figures is in cast concrete with a slightly different hue and a handmade beaded adornment. Each of them has in the chest area what appear, I would say, somewhat ambiguously as breasts, but also as a bit of a capsule wherein the precious can be held. And each of the figures will have a kind of open eyes that allow the sun to come through them. This work simultaneously speaks to an Indigenous history on all of these lands that we share in North America, but also speaks to Rose's particular perspective as an artist bridging contemporary art practice with the traditions that she was raised with and knows. And I apologize for the terrible photograph that you see here, the small image of a maquette. I took it myself, which is why I'm a curator, not a photographer. But this is a work of Rose's that we have on view while we're getting ready to open Counterculture. And it is diminutive, yet not cute. This object is powerful and just gives us a glimpse of the extent to which Rose B. Simpson is emerging as one of the most extraordinary artists working in the United States today. Recent exhibitions that Rose have participated in have been a real pleasure to view, including these images of these two ambivalent parental kinds of figures that were on view at the school, Jack Shainman Gallery in Kinderhook last summer and fall, and which are currently on view in a major exhibition of contemporary ceramics at Mass MoCA in North Adams, Massachusetts. This is a quite extraordinary project, and you're seeing not only these sculptural figures which have this kind of ancient but also very modern, even contemporary feel in the front. You're seeing examples in the detail that I'm showing you, a little bit of that adornment and those handmade beads that become part of the adornment of not only these figures, but also the figures that we'll see in Counterculture. And in the background, you're seeing a work, a photograph of a work that Rose made really for herself, which is the lowrider car called Maria. Rose made that, Rose, in addition to training as a sculptor, Rose also trained as an auto body finisher and made this car in homage to the great Pueblo ceramicist Maria Martinez. And it is both, I think, hilarious, but also a spectacularly beautiful object in and of itself. In addition to working with Rose for Art in the Landscape 2020, we also have the great privilege of working with the filmmaker Sky Hapinka, who's Ho-Chunk and who lives in the Hudson River Valley now. He is an inaugural artist in residence at Forge Projects. And and has made a career of some of the most searingly beautiful, yet also very mysterious films on, in many cases, Indigenous reservations in this country. So we're working with him on a film and a debut with many details to come. And giving you just a slight overview of the programming that we're looking at. And one of the things that I'd like to draw your attention to is that curator Jamie Lee Lacey, who's been working with us on this project, will be hosting this year a reading club called The People's Art History of the United States. I, for one, am looking forward to it. And because we will make it a Zoom reading club, we're really hoping for broad participation. It's an opportunity to talk to a curator who's been in conversation with Rose for years now as this project has developed. We're also looking forward to weekly curatorial and public conversations on the site with Rose's sculptures throughout the late summer. As we move into fall, we're moving into a whole different series of projects, including what I think of as an absolutely amazing project by Rachel B. Hayes, a Kansas-based artist who will be working both on an indoor and an outdoor installation at Fruitlands Museum. As we get ready to debut the fall season at Fruitlands, one of the things that's so important is the colors that people see in the landscape and the ways in which the landscape changes throughout the fall. So we thought the fall and winter would be an amazing opportunity to bring in Rachel Hayes's textile-based abstractions that move and change in the wind and that bring an extraordinary presence of color to the outdoor sites. She is also an artist who has worked extensively indoors. And so visitors will have the opportunity not only to explore this major commission for an outdoor piece, but also the spectacular patterns, which are to me so reminiscent of stained glass that she has produced for indoor works. At Cordova in the fall, we're looking forward to a project developed and curated by our own Sarah Montross called New Formations. This project was developed very much inspired by a gift of a work of art. We were given just a few years ago a selection of photographs that relate to early 20th century images of parades, of dancers, and of people who are participating in some kind of public and conjoined space. And so, like all curators who I admire so much, Sarah began to think about the ways in which artists conceive of people in space moving together. And so this exhibition takes off from the basic premise of what if we looked at dancers, parades, visitors, and pageants, and thought about what it means for people to lend themselves to spectacle. As Sarah began to think about this project, we also had the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement in this country. And I was absolutely struck by the ways in which thinking about people in parades, my sense of the visual identity of humans in some kind of formation and collection with one another was transformed by the view of the marches across the country during Black Lives Matter. And so what we are going to see in this show is a joyful and also a politically interesting, resonant, nuanced, and complex view of people looking at parades, people dancing, and people engaged in being together with their whole bodies. I promised to go a little bit beyond merely 2022 by giving you all our friends and closest patrons a view onto what we have coming up for 2023. These projects are in development, but we are so excited to be preparing to present Hugh Hayden, American Vernacular, in the first half of this year at the Cordova with a book that will be published by MIT Press, and again, developed by our very own Sarah Montross. Hugh Hayden is an artist who's getting an incredible amount of attention right now for a major project that's just debuted in Madison Square Park, the Briar Patch. And Hugh is a woodworker. He is an artist who is based currently in New York, and makes these objects that span the gap between the vernacular everyday objects in American life and something creepier, something that has an almost surrealist presence. I would not actually, as the title of this New York Times article says, call him a surrealist sculptor, but I would say that he is someone who is engaged in the psychological depth of the objects of our ordinary life. His work connects both to nature as well as to absurdity, and we are so eager to see this show come to fruition here. We're also, over the course of 2023, going to be looking carefully at photography in the age of the Anthropocene, a subject that conveys both the kind of specter of climate change, as well as human presence in all of its complex forms on this planet. I'm showing you here a photograph that really is, I think, a photograph in kind of the expanded field, a photograph that's almost become sculpture in the way it's presented to the public and the way it changes as you move around it, by the Peruvian artist Elena Damiani, and a photograph that is not an image of the world, but instead a literal index or record of the world by Megan Riepenhoff. This work, one of her literal drift series, is made with ice salt waves that hit a sensitive cyanotype treated paper and have made this resulting image that evokes but doesn't literally depict a wave. And this extraordinary work by the Singaporean artist Sim Chien from her Shifting Sand series, in which she tracked the movement of sand as a commodity from the nations of Southeast Asia to other nations of Southeast Asia. In this case, sand is being used to enlarge Malaysia itself. And you see here this sort of image of a family picnicking on newly created land. So we're very excited for Second Nature, as well as Hugh Hayden, two shows that will help us think broadly about the lands that we live on and the ways in which artists are contending with land now. We're looking ahead, giving you just a glimpse of the summer of 2024 with Art in the Landscape 2024, which is going to feature the artist Jean Shin, who is the 2022, I've written here that she's the 2024 Alana Partnership honoree, but she is actually the 2022 Frederick Church honoree for Alana. This particular work that you see here, I'm showing you not only Jean, but also our curator, Jessica Hong, who is working with Jean to bring this project to us. The work that you see here is not what we will see on view at Long Hill, but instead a work that Jean made in partnership with Storm King. It's called LA. And Jean developed this project as a way to reclaim trees that were coming down on the main LA through the Storm King property. And she made it into this extraordinarily beautiful communal table that became the site of events that the museum hosted that summer that this was up. And what we're looking forward to with Jean is the opportunity to work with her and invite her into our community to think about the transformations of the land and how to tell stories of the transformations of the land and its many occupants on our site. So I'm going to end my comments there with a huge thank you and an invitation to join us next week for the third webinar in the series, The State of the Coast, Beaches and Coastal Banks. I'm going to invite you all to look at all of our webinar recordings and a list of future webinars at trustees.org/webinars. And again, I can't conclude without a huge thank you and acknowledgement that everything you've heard today would not be possible without our donors, and especially our top supporters like our Founders Circle members. So do truly thank you for joining me, for investing in our mission, and for believing in a brighter future. I look forward to seeing you all next week, as well as at the Decorah Fruitlands and our other sites this summer. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm actually going to grab a Kleenex and then take some questions from you all.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
And just a reminder to the audience that you can submit your questions for Jessica at the bottom of your screen via the Q&A button. And we have a couple here for you now, Jessica. Is there an opportunity to encourage and display art, especially indoors, that explores the implications of climate change and its impact on our natural world? We are a conservation organization, and it would be useful if our thrust on coast, i.e. sea level rise, and other climate impacts could intersect with some of the art we are presenting to the public.
I think that's such an important question. And to me, I have really narrowed in on that as a key goal for all of our arts projects, because I believe that we can sort of take broadly thinking about climate change as well as issues of sustainability and think about the ways in which it has so many different effects on our lives, on the lives of future generations, and on the lives of those beings that share this earth with us. And I think, you know, for me, when I think about works like the upcoming project Second Nature, I think about that as this kind of extraordinary convening and conversation in which all of these artists are kind of thinking across their different practices all over the world. It will be a 50 artist show with artists from all over the world. And each of them, I think, is engaged in a rather deep inquiry into what it means to make art in the face of climate change and how we can meaningfully create new opportunities for people to understand the depth and seriousness of this of the moment that we're in and the environmental circumstances of our world. I think that what I would like to do is to continue to make the Decortiva a place where artists who are engaged in climate change have to be. I would love to get calls from artists all over the world thinking about how we can talk and we can show, we can display, and we can build an audience and a dialogue around art. So that question to me is one of the most precious and important goals that I have as the artistic director here and as somebody who's trying to think about how our program is meaningful in our region and globally.
Wonderful, thank you. Will the properties have curated tours of these exhibits?
You bet. One of the things that I think is so important is to create regular opportunities for curators to talk to members of the public, visitors, and artists. So one of the things that we are working on right now is a slate of opportunities to visit with curators and artists during the run of the Triennial. And so I would invite and encourage you all to stay tuned to trustees.org as well as our social media accounts for information about those events. But I also think that it'll be really important for visitors of all stripes, sometimes coming and just having the experience of seeing the curator speak, but sometimes having a more kind of formal experience to visit with both artists and curators.
Thank you again. Is there a set date for the Ricky sculptures opening at Namkeg that will be?
Yeah, I believe that it is April 20th. But I say that with a little bit of an asterisk because we're holding tight to the schedule of opening the Spring Flower Show. So I would do what I always encourage when I personally, Jessica May, am throwing out dates is say trust but verify. But we're looking at that basically that third week of April.
Thank you. And one of the first slides, there was a sculpture that I believe you saw on at Art Omai in Ghent, New York recently.
Mm-hmm.
Just wanted more clarity on how it relates to the trustees.
I think that you may have seen Alicia Quadier's Tunnel Teller, which if that is the right work, and maybe a person who asked that question may tell me, that work actually began as a trustees commission. It was part of the Art and the Landscape Commission. The work was commissioned by us. It was originally on view at the Crane Estate. And then, and that photograph actually comes from when it was on view at the Crane Estate. But it is true, one of the things that we're so proud of with the Art and Landscape Commission is that several works have been so important to the artists that they've been shown elsewhere. And Tunnel Teller, in fact, did go to Art OMI after it was on view at the Crane Estate. And we could not be happier.
Yes, you were correct with that, Jessica. Wonderful. And can you elaborate at all on some of the events surrounding these projects, specifically Melvin Edwards?
Yeah, one of the things that we are very excited about Melvin Edwards is that he doesn't travel a lot, but he will be coming up here this summer. We are still nailing down a date, so we will make sure that information is available very quickly. But he is going to do a public conversation, and my intention for that is that we probably will record it, so it'll be a live conversation. We're hoping to do that outdoors to welcome as many people as possible. And he will be speaking with the curator of the exhibition and really talking broadly about his life and work. I have had the opportunity to speak to Mel in the past, and he is an absolutely extraordinary speaker and storyteller, really. So I think that that's going to be a don't miss event, and really the highlight of that installation. We're also thinking broadly about that event. You know, one of the things that is not as well known about Melvin Edwards' practice is that his wife is a poet, and often his work is in direct conversation with her poetry. And so we're thinking a little bit about how to develop programs around poetry. So there again, those projects are very much at this point in development, but we're confirmed and ready to pin down a date on Mel coming to speak, and thinking broadly about how to connect poetry to the visitor experience for that particular exhibition.
Wonderful. And you have answered all the questions for today. So if you'd like to conclude, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Well, I am so thankful to you all for joining us and for being part of today's event. This is meaningful for us and an opportunity to show some real pride in the work that we're doing and we're getting ready to show to the public. So I thank you all for joining us, and I encourage any of you who would like to continue the conversation to reach out to me directly. My email address is jmay, M-A-Y, @thetrustees.org. Just as all of my colleagues, has a similar format. And I look forward to being in conversation and to seeing you all on our sites as soon as possible. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.